pleasure to introduce our next esteemed speaker, Celia Barclay, Information Commissioner from the Office of the Information Commissioner. Now, Celia will be enlightening us on the legal aspects of data protection, a topic of utmost importance in today's digital landscape. And her presentation is not only crucial for understanding the legalities, but it's also pivotal in building and maintaining trust within our businesses. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in warmly welcoming Celia Barclay to the lectern.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first start by just thanking the PSOJ and IDB for putting on this event and also for inviting me. Our office does look forward to the opportunity to represent at these occasions and just shed some light on the act and its importance. So thanks again. All right, moving swiftly along because I know we are pressed for time and have a tight program. Digital transformation, personal data, cybersecurity, service excellence. These are all topics that we have seen in the media. I mean, we have examples here over the past several months, but these have been circulating for quite a while, and there's a reason. We see where we're at in terms of technology, in terms of the risks to personal data, and so in terms of what we need to do to address those, I think that's where all our attention should be at this point in time. So we look at data protection, and I think it's perhaps the term that most ties everything together, because data protection, as you can see here, links both privacy in terms of information, especially personal information, and security, which we know when you talk about IT, when you talk about electronic access, cybersecurity is one of the greatest risks. What you're not seeing here, however, is the reference to perhaps the greatest aspect of data protection, the most important part being governance, data governance, privacy governance, having a governance framework that will allow you to be compliant with data protection laws. And that will include having your focus on your management, a top-down approach to ensure that everyone understands the commitment, the leaders who are making the decisions, as well as the persons at every level of your organization who have to have the necessary buy-in in order to ensure that they will adhere to the rules that you set. It's also having the policies and procedures in place to tell them how to ensure your compliance with the legislation, knowing that at the end of the day, you will be accountable. But most importantly, it's a matter of inclusion and ownership, because you have to ensure that even if it is that the Data Protection Act imposes the legal obligation and responsibility on you, that the persons that you are counting on to assist you in its implementation and in your compliance are there with you in terms of owning their part of the process and taking responsibility for every task that they have to do in terms of data protection and data processing. So we look at the Act and we recognize certain things. And I know that the PSOJ has done a lot in terms of sensitization of its members. We have participated in several of those activities, so I won't go into detail with those right now, but just to point out that there are very serious obligations that are imposed on data controllers, such as those represented here today, and further that offenses are created to ensure that there is an incentive to compliance. While the liabilities may rest with the persons and the entities, it's not just about who is going to pay and how much. There must be consideration for the respect for the data subject's rights and a recognition that outside of any criminal penalties that the law might impose, the data subjects themselves also have a right to redress. And so there is a need for you to be mindful of that and to ensure that those persons are loyal to you, that they trust you and your organization if it is that you are going to continue to do business. Now, this is the government's way of ensuring and bolstering business integrity and also ensuring sustainability of Jamaica as a whole in the international economy. Now, the compliance requirements are, most simply put, broken down into 5 things. Very easily stated, a little more difficult in terms of execution. So there's the annual submission of your registration particulars and your DPIA, which is the Data Privacy Impact Assessment. There's appointing a data protection officer for those persons who may be required to have one. Not everyone does. And of course, once you are registered, you need to adhere to the 8 data protection standards, and in the event of an incident, make your necessary reports to our office and notify your data subjects who may be affected. Most importantly, again, is that upholding of data subjects' rights, the persons who own and hold the information that you process. And I'll emphasize this throughout because we're here talking about building bridges. We're talking about sustainable development. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that none of that is possible unless the first bridge that you build is with the persons that you serve. Your consumers, your client, you have to build that bridge of trust with these individuals just to ensure your own continuity. And then beyond that, you now have to build the bridges with other persons. So trust is both internal within your organization as well as external. When you talk about it, you're talking about not just your consumers, but business to business. You're talking about countries to countries, economies dealing with each other. All of these have linkages that must be honored if you're going to talk about sustainable development. Now, we have 8 data protection standards, as I mentioned, which must be adhered to. I've outlined them here, but in the interest of time, we won't go into details with them. But it's just to note that it is your compliance with these standards that is essentially going to prove to persons that you take their information seriously, but by extension, that you take your business and your business operation seriously. Because we can promise you this much. If you don't take yourself seriously in honoring the legal commitments that you have, no one is going to take you seriously as a business. And we are having an increasingly informed public. We have an increasingly informed market. And later on, you'll see where persons are literally making decisions in terms of use of goods and services based on your compliance with different legislative measures, including the Data Protection Act. Now, in terms of the data subject rights, again, similar to the standards, I've outlined them because the presentation will be shared, but I won't go into detail with them here. I just highlight them because of their importance. When you talk about ensuring data protection compliance, certain points that I like to make here. First and foremost, the Act is non-discriminatory. Most laws are. What I mean by that is, we are here, this is a session that is put on by the private sector organization, but at the same time, we also have a public sector. And the Act treats equally with private sector and public sector in terms of the rights, the obligations, the expectations of data controllers. So it means inevitably that insofar as you have a shared goal, you need to ensure that to some extent you are working in the same manner towards the same things. And so there's an interdependence between public sector and private sector. Some entities are providing goods and services, others are facilitating those entities in that provision. The public sector has various regulation laws, everything that they put in place or enforce to facilitate things like fair trading, which is important to the private sector to ensure proper competition in the market. What does all this mean for you in terms of compliance? What it means is that the partnerships between the public and the private sector have to be strengthened. The public and the private sector are interdependent, and if only for that reason, there is a need for them to work together to ensure that laws such as the Data Protection Act, laws such as our cybersecurity legislation, that are all there to protect consumers of both sectors, public and private sector, are going to be upheld and honored. So we're talking about consultation as between the two sectors. We're talking about collaboration as between the two sectors, not competition within them or outside or conflict. Resolution of difficulties and overcoming challenges by working together. And we say this because success can only come through partnership. And it's only success if you're talking about it being long-term. It is only real success if you're talking about it being shared. It's not about the individual organization's ability to make a profit for today or for next month or for this financial year. You are talking about, as an organization, as an entity, whether a service provider or a producer of a good, being able to sustain yourself over time within a system, within an economy, both locally and internationally. And so that is going to rest on the relationships that you form. And those relationships also have to be sustainable. So these are recurring themes. You're talking about sustainable development. You're talking about building bridges for success. But the starting point has to be, as we mentioned, your relationships internally as well as externally, within the country as well as beyond your own borders. But there's no relationship that you're going to find that is not built on a foundation of trust. And that trust is only going to come through your communication, first of all. And I mention this because, again, this is very important to any system, any regime, any process working. How are you communicating to your stakeholders what you do, why you do, how you do? How much of it do they really understand and believe? Are you sharing your ideologies, your objectives, your approaches? It cannot be, for example, that the private sector has one motive and the government has an agenda that is inconsistent. It cannot be that in thinking about the provision of your goods, your service to your consumers, that you have no regard to the expectations and interests of those consumers. And so you see where the sharing of information is going to be critical. And I point out, for example, that with the Data Protection Act, again, communication is key, because it speaks about you ensuring that your data subjects know what are you processing, how are you processing, what is the purpose for which you are processing their information. Ethical management of consumer information and personal data is built into the requirements for compliance for both public and private sector entities. And so you have to think about whether it is a bank, a financial institution, somebody that is producing information, anything at all, how it is that you're going to communicate your policies, your internal practices in order to develop the trust. And that is what is going to show to persons the level of integrity of your business. Because business integrity is no different from personal integrity. Persons are looking to see, what did you commit to doing, and are you really doing that? So if you have an obligation under law to protect my personal information, and I can't see how you're doing it, or you tell me that you have these policies in place, these procedures in place, but then when I look at your activities, or I look at the reports in the paper, I'm not seeing that that's the case, then how am I going to trust you as an organization? And am I still going to want to do business with you? We have statistics that indicate that data protection is not just a legal requirement. Data protection is a major consideration for consumers today. We have seen where consumers are now making their decisions based on the data protection and compliance practices of organizations. More and more persons are looking at whether or not you have a privacy policy in place. More and more consumers are asking, what procedures have you established for me to deal with a suspected breach or a report of an actual breach? If I have a complaint about how your organization has treated with my information, who do I call? Where do I go? How will it be handled? Am I going to be ignored? And so, as a business, as a sector, as the entire public sector, these are things we have to be mindful of if we're thinking about going forward in today's world. So, as you think about compliance and as you think about your own success and ensuring that it's sustainable over time, you have to have a strategy. We want you to get to the point where building trust in your organization is actually a strategic objective. Digital trust is important. So now when you do your planning for your organization, it's not about how you're going to make production more efficient. It's not just about how you are going to increase your marketing, to increase your consumer base. It must be that there is a part of your plan that speaks specifically to how you engage your consumers, your customers, how you build their trust, how you ensure that at the end of the day, this is not a one-time purchase or a one-time use of service, but these persons will be returning to you. And you're only going to be able to do that if within your organization, as managers, at the highest level, at the senior level, at the lowest level as supervisors, you have shared goals in terms of building digital trust in your consumers. It must be that with those goals, you develop a program to execute and accomplish them. You must have a way of assessing yourself to say, am I meeting these targets that I have set? How am I going to know to what extent my customer base trusts me or not? And when you have done that, you also need to assess where the gaps fall in that process. Where are the risks? What is the possibility of you losing a part of your customer base? And how are you going to mitigate against those risks? This information provides different customer points that you have to think about. And at each and every part of it, you need to be looking at your legal obligations as well as your moral obligations, your obligations to self, to your team, and to your consumers. So when you think about the marketing of your products or your services to your consumers, you have to ask, am I doing it in the way that is required by law? Again, in the interest of time, we can't go too deep, so I won't speak too much on requirements, for example, in the Data Protection Act for direct marketing. But your service agreements, for example, with your data processors, are these also in compliance with the Data Protection Act? In carrying out these services, are you thinking about it with a privacy-conscious mind, having regard to how information is used, being passed, being processed? And are you meeting the standards that we put on display earlier? In building your relationships with your consumers, are they aware of the steps you're taking to protect their data? What support services do you have for them? So these are things that you have to think about in terms of going forward. So we have seen where, for the purposes of data privacy, you know that the only way you are going to prove that you are who you say you are as a compliant organization, as an organization moving towards continuity, sustainability in a digital world dependent on trust, is if you have maintained the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of the personal data that you are storing. But at the same time, that's not enough. We need to know that it is secure. I started this presentation with reports that showed the topical issues. But what has also been topical are the cybersecurity breaches that have become more and more prevalent every day. So we're gathered here today, and I know there are some very esteemed speakers that will form the panel that will speak on the importance of cybersecurity and some of the measures that can be implemented in terms of ensuring that your information is secure. These two components will come together to create the high level of integrity that you want in your business to manifest and to portray to your consumer base. 70% of consumers believe, note it says believe, that the companies they do business with protect their data. Now, that's a very positive number. It's not 100, but if more and significantly more than half your consumers believe that you have something in place, that seems good. Until you look at the contrast where you see 57% of executives report that their organizations have suffered at least one material breach in the past 3 years. So the question then is going to be, is this belief that your clients, your consumers have misplaced? How confident are you standing as an organization? What happens when that 70% find out what the 57% have been hiding? Are you protected by what might be a very thin veil of trust that could fall at any minute now? And if so, what are you going to do about it? The cybersecurity threats take a number of forms, but at the same time, there are just as many mechanisms out there that you can use to mitigate against these risks. How many have you employed? Because at the end of the day, you are going to be not just held accountable in terms of law, that is a real consideration, but more importantly, for your organization, for the country, for an economy that is looking to grow, are you going to be able to sustain yourself and us? These are thoughts that I leave with you to ponder on as you listen to the discussion of the panel for the rest of this function. And just to close, I like to incorporate and just steal from the Honorable Minister, Dr. Dana Morris-Dixon. In giving her presentation in Service Excellence Week, she shared this building that shows the importance of certain elements in digital transformation, which of course is our portfolio area. And you can't separate digital transformation, a digital economy, from areas such as data protection, cybersecurity, having your infrastructure in place. You'll notice that cybersecurity here is the foundation, or a part of the foundation. Everything stands on it. But the most important part for me is when you look at the elements that make up the roof, that shelter everything, the last one that stands in your mind is trust. So I close in just reminding you of the importance of trust as every aspect of the bridge that you are seeking to build, whether that is within your organization, whether that is with the other businesses with whom you deal, or on an international level. Without trust, you will not have success, you will not have a sustainable business, and the country certainly will not achieve its sustainable development. Trust me. Thank you.